Morning.
Show key words or images as well. Shush, I'm talking.
Okay, our first speaker this morning is Dawie Swanepoel. He gave me extensive notes on himself. He studied theology at Tux. He's the owner of a backpackers in George, and he's a natural-born libertarian.
Is that the summary?
That's the extensive notes. We've had him as one of our group for many years now. I don't know how long.
Long time.
Yeah. And I'm looking forward to his talk. He's given us one before, which was very good. And we're very interested to hear about R.W. Johnson. He has strong theories on the future of South Africa.
I don't know, should I do all the previous Afrikaans people spoke very fluent English. Don't expect the same from me. I changed the topic at the last minute. It was supposed to be Thomas Sowell. Once I started preparing for the talk, can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Yes. Once I started preparing for the talk, I couldn't find my Thomas Sowell books. I had to change it to R.W. Johnson. It's basically the same thing. The experience for me reading Thomas Sowell or R.W. Johnson is exactly the same experience. I'll try to explain it to you. It's actually very tough to be me. I'm Afrikaans speaking. I'm male. What else? I'm heterosexual. I'm practically just genetically, politically, incorrect. Is that the word? Incorrect. And that limits the amount of topics I can mention in polite conversation. Because the moment I start a topic that's controversial, I'm the typical verkrampte, old, conservative Afrikaner, old fart. And so I'm topic challenged, if you wanted to. If my name happens to be Frances Kendall, that's a nice English sounding name, it's female, she can talk about more stuff than I can. If she happens to be a lesbian, that will add a few more topics.
Be interesting topics, these ones, yeah.
If she happens to be black, that will add a few more topics. So, reading Thomas Sowell and reading Johnson, I can quote them and say, these are not conservative Afrikaners. I can quote them and place the blame on them. So my experience when reading both of these guys is exactly the same. I read stuff that I never allowed myself to even think about. So, R.W. Johnson, I assume that you all know who R.W. Johnson is. He's called Bill Johnson. I'm not going to introduce him. Charles says he doesn't know who.
I don't know that. I don't know who he is.
We'll tell him later.
Thank you.
For the illiterate ones, he's half Pommy, he's half South African. He went to school in England, went to school in South Africa, studied at University of Natal, won Rhodes Scholarship, went to Oxford University, became a professor of history at Oxford University, came back, retired in '92 I think, came back to South Africa, worked for the Helen Suzman Foundation, retired from that, and I guess he might be about 80 years old at the moment, living in Cape Town. He wrote 12 books, all of them quite famous. The last one is more well known, I think something about when will South Africa finally collapse or something like that. I did read the book, but I can't remember the title.
Can South Africa survive?
The next 2 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, the 2 years is a rumor, that's not. But that's added to his book. He never mentioned the 2 years. But so he's a well-known political analyst in South Africa. He's very controversial. He is completely politically incorrect. He says, because he doesn't earn a salary, he doesn't have to explain to anybody. He's 80 years old. He doesn't care. He calls a spade a spade. He's clearly very intelligent and knowledgeable. Okay, I selected a few topics, 4 or 5 I think, just to demonstrate to you the things they talk about that I'm not allowed to talk about. The things that they say, the same with Thomas Sowell. Thomas Sowell, what's so convenient about him is that he's black. So you can always say, this black man says this, and then you can say anything wrong. Bill Johnson is unfortunately white, but he is, his credentials are quite safe. The first thing, do we have it there? I don't know.
There you go.
Oh, there you go. The first thing that I picked up from Johnson was, how's it going in South Africa? I was always looking for a clear answer to that question. If you ask anybody that question, it's always a waffle and a and ha, and you never get a clear answer. I want the clearest, exact answer you can give to that question. There's a little quote from Johnson, the key measures of, I can't read English, or whether the life expectancy and GDP per capita improve, as they did under colonialism and apartheid. That gives you an indication. It's true, but you're not supposed to mention it. These two measures largely define the population's welfare, and there can be not too much argument about it. You get bad news and good news in any country. South Africa is the same. You can either choose to emphasize the bad news or the good news. Depends on who you ask. 62% of the population will emphasize the good news. I've always been involved in opposition politics, party politics. So all I know is the bad news. South Africa was always on the brink of disaster for the past 35 years of my, I'm not 35 years old, but I only started thinking after a while. But so I always focused on the bad news. If you ask me about South Africa, I always say, well, we are on the brink of disaster. The disaster never happened. So I realized after a while, I need to be a little bit more concise on this answer, on this topic. I went to all the indexes. Let me just see. These indexes, as you know, this thing doesn't scroll. I don't know where the mouse is.
Use the scroll button.
Yes, I do, but I can't. Oh,
Down, page down.
I can't see the arrow.
It's there too.
Okay, it's the arrow. I can't see it. Oh, there it is. I went to look at, that was a couple of years ago. I went to all these indexes, you all know them, indexes, rankings, world rankings, reports, I don't know what you call them. The one that we like is the freedom of the world. There are other freedom ones, there are corruption ones, there are ones on health, on crime and everything. I've found 52 of these reports. To read through these reports is very interesting, and it gives you a more clear picture of South Africa. The impression I got was that South Africa is a below average country. There are more or less 200 countries in the world. We come in at about 110 to 120. So it's arguable, is that where we belong? Should we improve? Because if you ask the whiteys, they always complain. They want us to be at 60. But maybe we are just where we are. We are where we belong. About 100 out of 200. 110, let's make it 150 out of 200 countries. Probably that's where we belong. But that is not the answer I wanted. It's not clear enough. It's only an impression. I really want a concise, exact answer. And for that, I have to scroll back to the quote. Oh, let's do this quote. That's another indication of Bill Johnson's thinking. After 94, the ANC discovered the Human Development Index and gave it great prominence. Before long, however, South Africa began to fall down the index at an alarming rate, and government interest evaporated. The clear answer I was looking for. Can anybody see the arrow?
Yes. Look on your screen.
On
the right-hand
far
side.
Look on your screen.
Okay, but I
It's
didn't-
probably
Oh, yeah, it is. That's easy.
Sorry, it's not obvious.
The answer I was looking for was Johnson reduced it to two indicators: the life expectancy and the GDP per capita. And to me, that was quite an insight. Is that the English word? Because that was what I was looking for. Reduce it to absolute minimum. But the two things that make sense. That basically is an opsomming of the whole country. And since then I used it. You need a formula, of course, to say exactly South Africa is a 4.31 out of 10 country. I'm just too stupid to do that calculation, but it was inspiring to discover that. Right, look at me scrolling now. The next topic is ethnicity. He's often criticized for his emphasis on ethnicity. Somebody, I think it was Andrew, mentioned yesterday that at election time, ethnic groups does matter. But it's one of his, one of the things that he gets criticized a lot. Whenever he talks about a politician, it's always Tswana this, or a Zulu this, or a Xhosa that. He never mentions just the name. Cyril Ramaphosa is a Venda. I find it very irritating at times because it doesn't make any sense to me whether it's a Tswana or a Venda or a Zulu or whatever. Just let's go to the quote again. The ANC liked to set itself the target of demographic representativity in all spheres except for one. But this was taboo subject. Even to notice that Xhosa specifically and Boonies in general were way overrepresented at the top was regarded as reprehensible. I don't know much about black tribalism or black ethnic groups. Maybe I should know more, but as it is, I don't know much. But I'm white, and I do know that the white people in South Africa consist mainly of two ethnic groups, the English and the Afrikaans, and I know much more about them. So I started thinking about English and Afrikaans. Let's say, for instance, that the ANC government gets fed up with us because we are always complaining, and they give us our homeland, Bantustan, somewhere. Orania will be the capital, and Wavy, we can ask for coffee fontaine as well. So, if we have to manage this Bantustan with two different ethnic groups, I think it will be nearly impossible. You need really, and that's not because I don't like English people, I love them. It's not, I just think that the differences are very clear. We are compatible. If we compare us to the guys in Spain, who are those guys in Barcelona? And the boss, the Catalonians. They are just not compatible with the rest of Spain. They just don't want to be Spanish. The English and Afrikaans in South Africa, they are quite compatible, but still, it will be very difficult to keep the two groups together. So I think ethnicity is important and it should be taken into account. Maybe not as important as it is for Bill Johnson, but it is definitely something that should be taken into account. I've done a little experiment myself. I've been involved with Sue for 20 years now. In those 20 years, I've never spoken one single word of English to her, and she's never spoken one single word of Afrikaans to me. And we do talk, I promise you.
Yes.
And it's completely natural. We are not even aware of the fact that we speak two different languages. It's just a completely natural conversation. The problem is when you start, because half of my family now is English, half is Afrikaans, and when you start comparing families, then it gets a little bit more complicated. And the language is not a problem, because most people in South Africa are bilingual. Most of the black people speak English, so I think the language is not a problem. But with Sue, she's got a lot of, don't tell her please, a lot of irritating habits. For instance, she just loved the kings and queens in English. I don't understand. She knows them all. I know Lady Di, and apparently she's not with us anymore. She knows them all. She actually thinks that those people are special. It irritates the hell out of me. So, there are differences that will pop up if we have to share the same roadmap. Next topic, political correctness. Let me just do the scrolling thing again. Political correctness.
Can you not use the roller?
I do, but it's not rolling. Watch my finger, I'm rolling.
You're on a roll.
Political correctness, my own definition of political correctness is the generally accepted norm of the day. It's a stupid definition. It's really stupid. I hope that somebody else has a better definition.
Yeah, political correctness is a liberal philosophy which presumes you can pick a turd up by the clean end.
It's a form of censorship by social dominance.
Peer pressure, yeah.
My definition, the problem with my definition is the word accepted. It's the generally accepted. Political correctness is much stronger than just the accepted norm. It becomes a law. It becomes enforced into everyone's life. And it's actually a very strong law. I just didn't know how to put it into that definition. Of course, Bill Johnson, as I said, he can't care less. He can't care about political correctness. He says whatever he wants to. My question here is, what is the most politically incorrect thing you can say in South Africa?
It could be a competition.
Johnson, let's do the quote. Johnson is quoting John Cain Berman. Another one worthwhile reading is
A libertarian.
he's a libertarian as well. We should get him here one day. We are building an economy in which whites have to become more and more self-reliant, while blacks become even more dependent on what government forces whites to do for them. That's a strange form of liberation. What he's actually saying that blacks are nothing without whites. The only thing black people will ever achieve is what the white people do for them. Now that is, it's about as harsh as you can get. And I don't think I've ever, and John Cain Berman, if you told me 30 years ago that you will ever talk in terms of black and white, I wouldn't believe you. And there he is. It's extremely politically incorrect. And John Cain Berman just do it. I think what I thought was that criticizing Mandela is definitely the most politically incorrect thing you can do in South Africa. He's divine. You just don't touch him. And Bill Johnson, of course, he just go for Mandela. The first thing was Shell House. I don't know if you remember Shell House. I can't remember what happened to Shell House. Not at all. I can't remember what. I remember the facts. Lots of Zulus were killed. They were shot from Shell House, from the windows with lots of guns. And if you compare Shell House to Marikana, Shell House was actually, in every aspect, a worse disaster than Marikana. And somehow, Shell House disappeared from the history. Marikana will stay with us for the next 50 years. I just can't remember what happened to Shell House. I remember the incident, but what happened to all those guilty parties? What happened to the commissions of inquiry? What happened? I can't remember. It's just vanished into... Mandela, on television, said he gave the command to kill. He admitted it, openly on television. And that stopped the whole inquiry. Because nobody was willing to take on God. The whole inquiry stopped there. Nobody ever heard of it. That's Johnson's opinion, not mine. I just quote him. Mandela, apparently, most of his overseas trips was to collect money for the ANC. Of course, you know, he traveled overseas abroad every single week. And most of them didn't benefit South Africa at all. It was just to collect money from the ANC. He even went so far to give the Order of Good Hope. I think that's something that you only give to very, very special people. He gave the Order of Good Hope to Dawie and Suharto. That's the guy from Indonesia, I think. They did absolutely nothing for South Africa, except they gave millions and millions of rands to the ANC. He goes on. Mandela gave Sol Kersner. You remember the Sol Kersner thing? He bribed the homeland people, and it was in the news for a week or two. Apparently, the 2 million, and Mandela admitted that, the 2 million rand went to Mandela himself. And he admitted that. But nobody knows what happened to the 2 million rand. Up till today, nobody dare ask Mandela, listen, what did you do to the money? It's just gone. I can continue there. He's just going blatantly for Mandela. Mandela died as one of the richest people in South Africa. We will see lots of pictures of Nkandla, and we are sick and tired of Nkandla. Apparently, Nkandla doesn't compare to all Mandela's mansions. He had one in Pretoria, he had one in Joburg, he had one in Cape Town, he had one in Mozambique. The one in Mozambique is not a mansion, it's a palace. He had one in the Eastern Cape. And it's completely impossible for Mandela to pay for all these mansions. Just the mansions, not all his other luxury items from his salary. It was absolutely impossible. So how did he pay for all these things? Nobody questioned, nobody asked the questions. It's Mandela, you don't ask him. To me, that is probably, the most politically incorrect thing you can say is criticizing Mandela. And I only mentioned a few examples. You can carry on with the, what's the Wapenskandal? What is that? The arms deal, that's it. There are many, many things. So that brings us to the end of the topic of political incorrectness. I would like to know better definitions for political incorrectness, or political correctness then. Okay, scrolling. The last topic, were they right? This is not meant for the people of Orania. I didn't have you in mind when I started this topic. Those right-wingers in the olden days, were they right? They predict South Africa correctly. That's the question. According to Bill Johnson, they did predict South Africa far better than the what do you call it, progressive, the liberal kinds. Look at this quote. Those of us who fought them thought we were cleverer, is that an English word? Cleverer, and more sophisticated than the apartheid supporters, and we abhorred racism. It is painful to acknowledge that the racists often predicted the future better than we did. There's another one there. It is galling, whatever that means, galling, to admit that this is just what white racists predicted and what white racists, radicals like myself thought. My family, most other families love each other, they do nice things to each other, and they call each other on birthdays and stuff. My family, we talk politics. That's what we do. That's our thing. We don't discuss politics, we fight. And in the olden days, there was the liberal section, which I belong to, and then the old Verkrante section. And they always, let me start with this, the focus of my arguments always, as a so-called liberal, was that apartheid is morally wrong. So I always focus on the moral principle. It's morally wrong, it's humane, is that the English word?
Inhumane.
Inhuman. That was the focus of my, I didn't care about the future. It's just, let's get rid of this apartheid thing. My more conservative family members said, their focus of their argument was always, black people are incompetent. Doesn't matter what you throw at them, they will come back to black people are incompetent. You know, if you get a black government, no, if you get an African government, they will create an African state. And who wants to be an African state? Because they're all black. That was the main focus of their argument. Nowadays, if we discuss politics, I hate this part. They always tell me, listen, we warned you back in the 80s. We told you. We predicted exactly this. You wanted this. Now you complain. I don't have the answer. They did warn me. I still don't believe that black people are incompetent. I do the politically correct thing. I say the ANC is incompetent. I hate that argument because I just don't have an answer to that. What I do when I don't have an answer, I start attacking them personally. Thank you, that's all. Is that it?
No, it doesn't it? I'm just thinking maybe I'll come and make a list of names. Too much for you, darling. Who's got a pen for me?
He's off.
Thanks. Okay. Hands up.
Hands up what one?
Start with Margaret.
Just a comment about Mandela's mansion in Mozambique. It might actually belong to his wife. Because, you know, she was the widow of a president. And I do seem to remember something about she got that house in the will or something. So that, you know, we need to be sure about whether that was his. It might have been hers. But I'm not sure. I don't know.
You are not sure, I can tell.
No.
No, it's also one of these anecdotal rumors. I know Benny. Benny used to be the accountant for this whole project in Mozambique. He retired at the age of 40 from the money he made from this Mozambique project. The architect firm that did it was also some Afrikaans firm in Pretoria. Mandela did the fee to pay for this.
Oh, okay.
And they all retired at the age of 40 after that project.
No, well, you've told me
I'll give you
something
Benny's telephone number if you want.
There's another mention.
He's way on the list.
Eligible 40-year-old with lots of money.
Andrew?
Just a few words about RW. I know him fairly well. Both live in Cape Town. I think he's much nearer 70 than 80. He looks like a grumpy version of Verwoerd. Verwoerd was always smiling. He's nearly always grumpy. He writes terribly well. I agree with him most of the time. Calling him a libertarian, he was actually a socialist in his youth, almost a Marxist.
He was communist.
Yes, and I think in England he used to support the Labour Party.
Yes.
And if you see him, you notice he walks in a funny way. The reason is because he's only got one leg. And the way he lost the leg, just a warning to everybody, he was swimming in a lagoon near Durban, and he came ashore and he stubbed his toe on a rock, and 48 hours later he was almost dead. The flesh-eating bacteria set in and just ripped through all of his tissues and muscles. There's the heart-lung machine for months, I think, and just recovered, but lost the whole of one leg below the hip. He had gangrene on his fingers and so on and so on, so it's lucky to get out.
Wow. Are you basically saying he hardly has a leg to stand?
Okay, guys.
Some balance on.
Scott?
Can I just comment on the leg?
Yes.
The legless leg. I phoned him before the talk, and he said he woke up 5 o'clock in the morning, that specific morning, because of pain in his leg that doesn't exist. He said his ankle was paining so badly that he couldn't sleep. So, just a comment.
How many years since he lost the leg? That he's still got the
It's about 2-3 years ago.
No, it's longer than that.
It's longer.
Okay.
About 10 years.
Shows you.
Okay, just some balance on that statement about like what we're doing is we're building a society where basically all the blacks are dependent on what all the whites are doing for them. I mean, I don't have the exact numbers, but I mean, the time is fast approaching when rich black people will outnumber white.
Already.
Yeah, no.
Is it already?
Yeah.
Is it already the case at the moment?
Yeah.
More black middle class than there is total white people in this country.
Okay, but at the same level. I mean, the total wealth of white society versus like
Only as
just
the figure for middle class, the definition being over a certain income. I don't know what the average income of black middle class is compared to white middle class.
And the thing about lots of those predictions is it just seems like, and I agree. I mean, things are like not necessarily as ideal as they could have been, but I think there's always like way too many factors to say, okay, well, listen, this is definitely what's going to happen. And I think as that thing continues, I mean, black people. Again, I mean, like you said, I don't believe they're incompetent either. You know, I think at a certain point they also get hardcore for this stuff. And with the DA and so forth, which is also not something I think is ideal, but at least it's a balancing effect. You know, yeah, that's.
Okay, the point of the quote was, we've got a government that forces black people, white people, to do stuff for black people.
Yeah.
Do you agree with that?
Well, yeah, it's through a bunch of different mechanisms like BE and taxation. They're saying on at least the taxation side, it's going to be rich people doing stuff for poor people, which is pretty much like how all socialism turns out. In our case, there just happens to be a nice soft target in that the one bunch is pale and the other bunch is dark.
Used to be.
Yeah, it used to be, but it's going to become apparent soon. I think that is no longer the case.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No. It's next, it's Harvey.
I was just on the topic of the house in Mozambique. When I was a student, one of my friends actually worked part-time, or he worked and he studied part-time architecture, and he actually worked with the firm Burgerman Krieger.
Oh!
Yeah, and he did the 3D rendering for that actual project.
There's another contact here.
So just real live work. It was definitely a Mandela project that was instructed to Burgerman Krieger is one of the major firms, architect firms in Johannesburg.
Yeah. They're building Kanga as well. No, these guys sound professional.
Trevor?
You complain about Mandela and possibly even Zuma. But, if you really want a bad president, try Bashir al-Assad and have a look at what happened to his country, or Muammar Gaddafi and have a look at what happened to his country, or even Mubarak in Egypt, and have a look at what happened to his country. We got off relatively lightly. in this process. And we are the subject where our government is one of 4 communist regimes left in the world. Gee, what a surprise. They take from the rich and give to the poor. Nobody saw that coming. What we've done over the years, and I don't know how politically incorrect it may be to do here today, is that I know I've asked this question at many past Libertarian seminars. And if, with the chair's permission, who would rather live in pre-1994 South Africa or pre-1990 South Africa? And who would rather be living in post-1994 South Africa? Could I ask that question on a show of hands? Pre-1994 South Africa?
Oh, can I answer that question?
Well, you can put up your hand.
Okay, ask the question.
Pre-1994 South Africa. Who would like to be there?
Political incorrect thing to do.
Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, and post-1994 South Africa, who wants to be there?
I want to be in France.
It's a false start, not to me. So there you got it.
Dawie, you want to say anything?
No.
Okay, next one's Ayanda.
Thanks, sir. Dawie, you don't know much about black tribalism, so I know much about that. So we can share the beauty of a diverse libertarian. Now, the thing is, it's real. Anyone who wants to ignore that is just fooling themselves in Africa. That's what Africa is about. And that's why in your constitution, the fact that you have, even though it's an expensive system, a fairly strong provincial, I think, is helpful. Because this releases tribal issues. If we had a more centralized government, where you take Tswana people and you post them to KZN, and vice versa, like what happens in Zimbabwe and other places, the tensions would even be more. That these are real issues. I guess the Nguni group in South Africa is in the majority, but that of course does not excuse them to abuse that power. But I think democracy in Africa in general, I said this yesterday, is about we're in the majority, we get into power, we almost have a right to oppress everyone else. And so if one is a political commentator and all that, to be blind to those things, I think would be a greatness. And I think RW is correct in pointing them out. Even though
It is a reality.
yeah, and no African government will admit it, but they all do it, and they all run by it. But as I say, the more federal a country can be, in my view, that should be a system for Africa, because that gives everybody a bit of a say, in at least the local effect. So, diffusion of power, devolution of power, to me, in Africa, is important, and that's the way we should go, even though it might be an expensive system, but it allows everybody to feel they have a voice.
Chief? You had your hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you, this is seeing it from, this libertarian perspective. Seems to me the closest thing, seeing it from the black perspective, or the liberated perspective, is Frantz Fanon. Not Marxism, but Frantz Fanon. Have you looked at that, and do you understand that? Apparently, I haven't read it, but he does predict there will be quite a disaster after the end of colonialism, but maybe that's just a stage and we go beyond it. Do you have any information on that?
If you tell me that name the second time, that will be sick. No, I've got no.
I think it's essential to read this guy.
I've never heard of him.
Never heard of it.
Okay, next was Ron.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for the talk. Just the point I want to make is that there is a way of addressing Mandela's heritage and legacy in a way that is politically correct if you want to look at other points. And what a technique that you can look at doing is concentrating on stuff that didn't happen after 1964. For instance, Mandela was a particularly bad family man and a particularly poor father. To go and have children and effectively abandon this in favor of some higher purpose and a struggle, being a philanderer whilst all of this happened and having affairs, etc. If you can bring people to understand the human part of it, and there's no argument around that, he admitted himself, it's a lot easier then to bring in the other facts, saying, well, the fact that he wasn't that he was human, that he made mistakes, could he have done so thereafter? Just a comment.
Apparently, he hit his first wife's senses. Is that true?
I don't know.
Because we don't know the first wife.
I wasn't there.
She was a German
Oh. But, so I can continue on Mandela quite a long time, but that is one of the accusations, that he beat her senses. It's true.
But it's
boxing lessons.
Yeah, I think the important thing is if you want to de-deify an icon, is just to bring in the human side of it.
I don't think that'll go down any better.
Yeah, let's move on.
Stephen?
Yeah, so just three quick things. The one is a bit of a side note on the arms deal. I happened to be having some drinks with naval officers in 1997 down in the Cape, and one guy was the finance officer from Pretoria who was working on the arms deal. And at that stage, that was early 97, he told us exactly how many submarines we were going to get, where the frigates were going to come from. So we knew exactly what was in the arms deal well before it became public knowledge. And when it became public knowledge, it was very surprising to me to find that everything was stated as if it came after Mandela. And of course the president is commander-in-chief, so he must have signed off on everything in the arms deal. And we knew exactly what was in it, even at a very low level. So
which president? PW?
No, Mandela.
Yeah. So yeah, okay, sorry.
I'm just making the point that there's additional evidence that he was heavily involved in the armed and then two other short points. I think that saying that the racists were correct is a bit unfair, because if you look at the state of the country currently, longevity might not have gone up so much, but I think there's a big influence of AIDS on that. And every other measure has gone up in terms of not necessarily GDP all the time. We have had a few low growth years, but GDP has certainly gone up from the 1980s. Living standards for poor people in South Africa has increased incredibly. Like Scott mentioned, the demographics has changed to such a point that they're going to see soon, if they haven't realized it yet, that black people are paying most of the taxes or have most of the wealth. Even though you split the wealth, or even though the wealth is split in such a way that black people earn less than white people, just the demographics, the fact that there are 10 times as many means the total wealth is a lot more. And you have to look at how we've progressed over the last 20 years. It's actually astounding to me that anybody can actually think that pre-94 South Africa was better. It actually boggles my mind that people see all the negative things. If you really compare where we were pre-94 to where we are now, it's an incredibly big difference in terms of people having electricity, access to water. And I'm not saying it happened in the right way. I think we could have been in a much better place had it not been provided by government and rather provided privately. We could have been light years further than what we are. But you must make no mistake, despite the mistakes and the issues that there are, we're in a much, much better position than in the 80s. And I'm glad I provoked some more questions, but I just want to make one more comment. The last thing I'd like to just add to that is around tribalism, like what Diana was saying. I think it's very important to understand the whole issue around tribalism. And I think what's going to happen in the future is there's a communist or a socialist tendency to centralize. But when you've got 11 official languages and overlapping cultures, and people can't necessarily be forced to live in the same space, but you can very easily share the same space. I can go to work, and that has absolutely no bearing on my neighbor or anything that he does or says. And I can go change jobs or start living in a different way. My neighbor doesn't even have to know. So the close proximity to me is to some extent irrelevant. But when you start implementing things at a central level, so I have to pay for my neighbor's refuse removal, or the road that runs past his house, now I suddenly have an interest in what he does and how he lives. And that makes a big difference. So actually, to some extent, that centralization and that collectivism is the root cause of the tribalism problem. But the result of that is going to be that either you're going to centralize and there will be a clash because of the collectivist interest in each other's lives, or you will have to disperse and say, okay, now split. You all go care for your own communities. Because if you don't care for your own community and the other guy that you are forced to care for is doing stuff that doesn't fit in, that's where the conflict is going to come from. But I see a sort of a natural progression towards peace, hopefully, from the natural process of people trying to devolve power and split it up. In many private spheres, Orania is one example.
Those weren't 3 short points.
Sorry.
Now, we haven't got very much time left. I'm not adding any more names to the list. You guys are already on. We'll run a little bit into tea time. Scott.
Trevor, to answer your question, right, here's what I honestly believe would happen. If we had something like we had from 1990 to 1994, we had the people running the country, was running it during that period, and we had generally the policies then. If there was another South Africa further south, we would see enormous immigration, as that thing existed today, from our South Africa to that South Africa, enormous immigration. Literally, I went looking for the statistics on, that's the right one, like immigration into South Africa. There were only 2 periods where it turned negative, where all the people fluxing in eventually decided, okay, well, there's not that much opportunity, or maybe there's more opportunity back home. I think okay, I'm speaking under correction, but one of them was like from 2012 about. It's swapped back to the point now where, okay, well, you know, going back to Zimbabwe might now be slightly more favorable than sticking around in South Africa. Right, and honestly, if there was another South Africa that was pre-1994, but let's say post-1990 with that group of people running it, honestly, I think that would be the absolute light of Africa.
Andrew?
A quick point about tribalism. There's nothing particularly African about tribalism. It happens all around the world. If you looked at a political map of modern Europe, it's a tribal map. Yeah. France is the land of the Franks, Germany is the land of Germany, Belgium is the land of the Belgae, England is the land of the Angles, and so on. It's a tribal map. We're all tribal.
Yeah.
On South Africa since 1994, you mentioned Kane Burnham. I also know him quite well. He's the head. He used to be the head of the South African Institute of Race Relations, which present the best facts and data on South Africa. And as they say, over a whole range of data, South Africa has improved tremendously since 1994. We've lifted millions of people out of the lowest rungs of poverty. We've provided housing, electricity, etc., etc. So in general, it's been a huge improvement. But there are areas where things have gone wrong: crime, education, etc., etc.
Leon?
Yes, does Bill Johnson mention some that's been hinted at here about to have recently done some research on what I call transformation, and I coined the phrase transformation denialism, the data seeming to show me that in fact there has been a spectacular amount of transformation in every possible way. The one piece of data you mentioned from him was life expectancy. Now, I'm very surprised about that because Garth and I looked at the graph just last night, and life expectancy rose continually. It's now at the highest level it's been for black South Africans. By every objective measure, black South Africans have done extremely well. Dawie quotes all the data to show that for white South Africans things haven't got worse. Unemployment in 94 for whites was about 7%, it's now 7.5 or 8%, essentially the same. For black South Africans it's gone up, but the living standards for black South Africans by every criterion, cell phones, credit cards, businesses owned, etc., passport, have risen spectacularly. So I agree with Bill Johnson about Mandela and everything else. These things are not binary, it's not all good or bad, there's always a complex mix. And you're absolutely right, political correctness doesn't allow us to acknowledge the complex mix. But is Bill Johnson, from what you said, it sounds as if he's silent about the positives. In other words, that he is binary. He sees only the negatives, not the positives.
If you use these two indicators, GDP per capita and life expectancy, he admits that South Africa after 94, there are lots of improvement.
Okay.
So that's his indicators, and he admits that there is a lot of improvement. He's not positive about transformation. He says there's a lot of bullshit. So
I've got you on the list of us, so don't worry. Margaret?
I don't think that the ANC want to oppress anybody, and I think that they just found governing much more difficult than they had anticipated. They were surprised by what happened in 1991. I think they were caught in the back seat and and that they don't really have enough skilled people to do all the things that have to be done, like run municipalities. So I just thought I'd say that.
That's sorry.
Okay.
Can I, for Bill Johnson, the incompetency is one of his central topics. The guys that Leon mentioned, the guys with the new grand fancy cars, according to him, those are very incompetent people who buy those fancy cars. So they get tax money, they buy fancy cars, but they don't use anything.
And I also wanted to say that they had a socialist communist sort of agenda. That as they came to power, the whole economic sort of thing changed in the world, and all of a sudden they had become capitalist. So they really didn't know what they were doing, even economically, and then so I think they were a bit confused.
It's basically a general question because economics, I'm trying to get up to speed with economics, and it's not really my strong point, and I know there's a bunch of economic gurus here. But with regards to the measure of GDP, the question of real economy coming into the GDP and so on, to what extent is GDP an accurate measure in the sense of if government expenditure is bundled into the figure, and the sense of when you're talking about who's actually being taxed, if most of the blacks are semi or indirectly employed by the government, either directly or indirectly via tender processes and services, to what extent can one say it is actually contributing in the sense of tax, or how is it just recycling already tax from productive agent in the economy and it's just basically redistributed through, and they taxed again on it. So in effect, if I pay 20% taxes but I'm government, or 40% taxes but I'm employed by the government, I'm not actually being taxed. It's just tax that's taxed elsewhere that's just being held back.
Good point.
So within that regard, the whole indicator of a GDP just boggles my mind. Why do we still use that? Is it still an accurate measure to actually use? Does it balance out over everything? If you look at the economy, I'm just struggling with the concept of real economy, GDP, and why do we still use it as a measure?
I'm the wrong Dawie. Dawie wrote it. The other guy, the guy working for you, he's also very clued up with
Loan shop.
Yeah, loan. He's also very clued up with economy. Can anybody answer him?
You can speak to me afterwards, so that's fine for time's sake.
Let's rather get on with it. Yeah, Jack?
It's been so long since I think the question that Trevor asked is actually, it's unfair. And I think Khabi hit the nail on the head. He just said it's a false dichotomy. And to say, would you rather live pre-94 or after 94? There are so many elements about what we have in the country today that you have to applaud, but there's many elements that we need to look at in the face which are inexcusable, as with pre-94. And then Dawie also said there's certain things that white people are allowed to say, there's certain things you aren't allowed to say because of social judgment. I'm not going to go into facts and figures, but I will give a quote that I've heard so many times from the work that I've done with the Cape Party, in Mitchell's Plain, in Delft, in Lavender Hill, from coloured communities. This quote, and I'm pretty sure anyone who's spoken to a coloured at a bar, having a sincere conversation, ons was tweede klas onder die apartheid regime, nou onder die ANC, ons is derde klas. They say they were second class citizens under the NP, now they're third class citizens. So this is just an emotive response from 55% majority of the Cape population saying that they're worse off now than they were under apartheid. So that's something to just think about. Some people might be better off now, but there are certainly groups of people who are not.
Okay, just about this progress argument. Of course, there has been a lot of progress since 1994, but it's quite normal. If the National Party would still be in power, there would also be progress, because every country progresses over time. Between 1950 and 1975, there's a lot of progress. So, yeah, I mean, it's self-explaining. But the ANC came
75 to 90?
It was indeed a lot of progress under apartheid as well. As he mentioned, even under colonialism, it was, and it compares very well to the present.
And Kola Barnard identified that as well.
Just on a point of order there. if I could, every one of the southern SADC states except Botswana and South Africa had a civil war in order to get where they are today. And it killed hundreds of thousands of people. It's not predictable that the future is always better than the past.
Okay. Thanks very much, Dawie. That was great.